So first, for this talk, I wanted to talk about why the book appealed to me and why I thought it would be good for Peddler. So first, it was the quality of the writing, the quality of the manuscript. That always has to come first. Secondly, it was a book about the exploring the female gaze, which is not something that's received a whole lot of attention in literature, I felt. And I'm just going to read you Peddler's mandate to show you how it fit in with Peddler. So Peddler's mandate was to acquire works of exceptional literary quality, which also breaks silences regarding widespread failures of social and political systems, to make books with serious intellectual and emotional content. In other words, that are also works of art. Now, here's the catalog copy that we came up with for Su's book, and hopefully that'll give you an idea of how it did fit with Peddler's mandate. When art student Mira Seme loses her father, she becomes preoccupied with images of flesh and anguish. Martin Zorn becomes her lover and muse, his body's every detail she commits to paper. It's not the first time Zorn has been curated. His sister, photographer Marie Claire Zorn, spent her career working to record every gesture her younger brother made, every emotion he expressed. She made them both famous and eventually destroyed them. Seeing Martin is Su Croll's debut novel, a work that investigates the predatory gaze, the tidal pull between artist and model, between the seeker and the sought. It's about grief and how grief can be held at bay, at least temporarily, by sex and art. So that's why it fit in with the mandate, I felt. And a big part of it too was that I was intrigued by the design possibilities of the book. And you'll come to see later that this was not going to be a book that was going to be straight ahead, as Emma will be able to attest to later, I'm sure. But I really felt that the design would contribute to the narrative, which I found intriguing. And then finally, I thought that Su was going to be great to work with. And I don't think that we can ever underestimate the value of having a team that just works well together to take a thing from an idea to something you hold in your hands. So Su, I'd like to bring you in here. The book has lots of design features that Emma will talk about, I think, in greater detail. But I guess just as a spoiler alert for folks, there were kind of four main components as I saw it. So there was the main narrative, which looks like this, which looks like a sort of standard novel that people will have read. And then there's the notebook of Marie Claire Zorn. So I'll just show you an example of what that looks like. So it's a different typeface, and it has a different visual appearance, and it signaled to the reader that something else was happening here. There was a different voice being communicated. And then there were fictional newspaper clippings that looked like that. And then if that weren't enough, there was even an imagined film script. And I'll just show you a little sample, which looks like that. So if anyone's ever kind of looked at a script for a play or a film, that's what it looked like. So Su, why did you feel that the book needed these visual components?
Well, there's three different characters, and I guess that's common in novels, and you could just title each section differently. Well, two reasons. One of them was I wanted to have Mary Claire's notebooks look different. And at first I thought, well, I could change the font, and then I thought it was, oh, this is too gimmicky. And I think at that point I actually asked you that, and you said, no, try it. So then I think this was already in the editing process, and I went back and I liked that. I liked that you got this instant visual cue. The reader got an instant visual cue, which you would have gotten anyway if it said notebook at the top. But I really liked that was different. It looked different. And all of the characters have a different look. I mean, even Martin's sections, which are straight dialogue sections like a play, have an M dash at the beginning of each dialogue. But I think that's still written in Times New Roman. I think that's standard type. But then once once you sort of gave the go ahead that you were interested in it, I really, really loved that the art criticism and the newspaper pages had that different look. They had that line on the top. They had, and I think in your notes you said in broadcast journalism, you call it actuality. And I've never heard that word, but I love that. And I know sometimes I have read books that sometimes will set off with a little newspaper clipping. And I really like that. The reader knows that we're in a different place once they start going, but in a book that's about visual artists, it was really wonderful to have this extra design component. And I know Emma will talk more, but I think there's 5 or 6 different typefaces, different fonts. And I think I hope that as the reader goes through, you'll cue in, oh, now I'm with Marie Claire. Now now I'm in a therapy section. Now I'm reading a newspaper. Now I'm reading a journal. Now I'm with the main text, which was, the Myra sections, which were like a third person limited narration. So I just thought that the design just reinforced what I could only do with words, with manuscripts. So I loved how it all, the look of it at the end.
I'm actually curious how readers responded to you. Did you hear from readers about that aspect?
A lot of people said to me, oh, I didn't know what was happening at first. And this was probably the first time we switched from regular main narrative to a notebook early on. But then I kept reading, and then it was like, oh, now I could see how I was going back and forth between different narrators, and it seemed to work.
Well, when we were setting to make this book, I knew that we had to have a really skilled designer, because this was not going to be for the faint of heart. So I knew that Emma was the person to do it for us. So Emma, what was this whole project like for you? And be honest, you can tell me that it made you want to jump off a bridge.
It didn't make me want to jump off a bridge. Yeah, I think it was really interesting for me because I did, I think, one other novel with Peddler, and I've done other novels with other presses. And usually it's just sort of flowing text and then making sure everything looks good. And so it's like a lot of like walls of text. So I felt like this felt more like doing a poetry book, but very, very long and with a lot more text, because the poetry books that I've done with Peddler and also with some other presses are, tend to have more experimental layouts and things like that. So it's been, it was pretty interesting. I can show you the file. Okay, I'm gonna do that now. Okay, so you can see that.
And you're using InDesign for this, is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically the process, for the very, very basic foundational stuff, the process for designing a book for me is I get the Word document and then I have to port everything over into the InDesign document. So it's a lot of copy pasting, and formatting doesn't copy over. So a lot of my job is tediously going through and making sure that the italics are back in place and things like that. So yeah, this is how the book is set up. And you can see, I'm just gonna, you can see all the pages over here. InDesign is kind of overwhelming, like the first time you see it. So, but you can see all the pages kind of laid out here. And my job was to figure out like each of the sections and what font would go with each section. So sometimes that was easy, like with the script pages. I'll jump down to those. The script was pretty simple because it kind of had to be, I guess, courier. I just went with regular script pages. So kind of like the formatting stuff, I just looked it up and figured out it absolutely has to be that to be recognizable as a script. and everything else was like a little bit less obvious. So the newspaper pages, I figured, because they're generally not necessarily always newspapers, kind of like art magazines and things like that, photography magazines, that it should be something that looks really modern. So I went with like a condensed sans serif. So I went with Avenir here, and then a condensed sans serif for the titles. So it's all Avenir. And then that was like, in these sections, you could have kind of a lot of, a little bit less like precision on the on the typesetting, because it's a magazine and it's done in columns. But I'll go back to the beginning.
That's something a person, a reader is used to, having columns and seeing that in newspapers. So it would, I guess it just authenticates it more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, is that because I saw that there were like, you know, real life applications to these, it wasn't just like different voices. I was like, you know, it needs to feel believable. Yeah. So then for the regular narrative, I just used Caslon, just ITC Caslon, very nice. I knew it had nice italics. And the chapter headings are repeated from the cover. So it's this really beautiful font Moiré or Moret. And that's from the one that was used on the cover of the book. Yeah. So there's a few kind of...
I once had a typesetter tell me, a bit tongue in cheek, when in doubt, set it in Caslon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tried and tested font for sure. I think, yeah, so the notebooks are also Avenir, but it's a more condensed version. So I tried really as much as I could to make it like as few fonts as I could, so that it wouldn't feel too like scrapbooky or too kind of like chaotic, but at the same time, like, you know, signaling to the reader that it's a new area. So this is kind of sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I remember having a conversation about the justification, line justification in the notebook section. Like, it looks good to the eye to have it flush left and right. But then I remember thinking, well, in a notebook, you're not, in an actual notebook, like in a diary, you're not going to have, so should we have it ragged right margins?
Yeah, yeah.
In the end, we decided to do it this way. And I think it certainly looks cleaner on the page to have it flush.
I thought we tried having the not flush margin at one point, and you know, in theory it's better, but visually this looks good. This looks better. Yeah.
I think in terms of typesetting, you kind of have to balance like what could be exhausting for readers, because like if you have something completely left justified, it can be tiring to kind of jump over those lines all the time. So it's like, you know, what works with the narrative and what works with, you know, making it easier for people to read.
And what's invisible to the reader at this point is that you give us a draft and you've already done a lot of this work, but then we sort of give it a second glance as well. Like, then we look to see about the spacing in between words. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, actually, geez, you could drive a truck between those two words. So is there a way to, you know, move up the word from the lower line up to the line above it so that the spacing looks nicer to the eye? And also, we try to avoid having a word hyphenated at the end of the line, again, we just want a clean, modern look. And that work is quite exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a peddler in-house style guide thing, and it was definitely made my job harder. But it does look nicer.
All right.
Yeah. So basically, just, you know, this was kind of like bigger InDesign stuff, but basically what I had done was I made these paragraph styles. So each, as I click on them, you can see this one's called article, you can see this one's called notebook, that one's just called body. So basically this made my life easier because I defined the styles. And then when I copy pasted more text, like in the next section, I could, if it was a body section, I could click body and it would, I wouldn't have to like set it again manually. So that's, that's basically the way that it works.
Can you make some general comments about how you conceptually, you get a Word document, and you've talked about copying and pasting and making sure the italics are there and whatnot, but conceptually, what goes through your mind when you sit down to design any book, not this book in particular, but taking something from an idea to an object?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot happens. Obviously, I try to read as much of the book as I can. It's not always like feasible time-wise to read it cover to cover, but I definitely, if there's like longer descriptions or design briefs, I read those in detail and then try to look through the manuscript. There's a lot of back and forth with the publisher to figure out sort of like what the vibe is and what the author wants also. Obviously, that's super important. And then it's just sort of a process of kind of like just going on how I'm feeling about it, and then trying some things out and going back and forth. So I'd say it's very collaborative. Quite often for me, what that means with type is kind of figuring out like what era of type to go with. Like if something feels very modern, this book felt like it was like almost both modern and classical. So it made sense to have Caslon, which is like a really clean, nice font, but it's still very classic, of course. But then have Avenir and some of these other newer fonts in there. But sometimes, some other books I might use something older like Baskerville that is like literally older type-wise, because you really like as a reader, it's all these subtle things that you would never think about as a reader, but you do get the feeling of it, and it does kind of signal something to you that that this book has something going on with it, and the design is meant to complement the text, of course.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Do either of you have anything else you're burning to say about the production of Seeing Martin?
Well, it was a great experience. It was a great editing experience for me. And then this further level of collaboration with Emma sending a whole lot of samples, or through you sending, that was really interesting. And again, it just gave it a whole other dimension.
Wonderful. Thanks to you both.